Okay, good afternoon, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the traditional lands that we are on. We are on the traditional lands of many First Nations, Métis and Inuit, who have walked these lands before us, including the Haudenosaunee, the Chippewas, the Wendat, and the Anishinaabe people. We are on treaty lands with the Mississaugas of the Credit. And as I like to point out, as many of you see, we are right near Lake Ontario. We have two rivers that run into Lake Ontario. That's what's brought Indigenous peoples to these lands for many years, because it was a source of water and food, and it was a meeting place. Traditionally, it continues to be, as we welcome so many people from around the world to this wonderful city. And so I think that the history, the long, long history of Toronto is important as we're talking about things like energy and environment as we are today. I'm also going to take a moment to acknowledge that today is the kickoff to the Poppy campaign, which is really important for Canadians. This is a moment for us to recognize our veterans, our service members, and all the sacrifices that have been made to defend our freedoms. So now, I'm here with my friend, the Honourable Tim Hodgson, Minister of Energy and Natural Resources. And as you all know, we've just concluded the G7 Energy and Environment Ministers meeting held under Canada's 2025 presidency. The past 2 days of conversations have been focused, candid, and action-oriented. Our discussions have left me hopeful. It fills me with optimism to see the leaders that we brought together in the rooms together, and we have a shared determination to act. Around the world, people are innovating, reimagining industries, and restoring nature. The solutions are here. Our opportunity here today is to match them with a political will and governance certainty and collective action they deserve. Throughout the discussions, the G7 reaffirmed its commitment to advancing these very shared priorities, driving multilateral efforts on environment, climate, and energy. G7 members work to strengthen global energy security, environmental sustainability, and climate resilience, while fostering economic competitiveness, long-term prosperity, and healthy, resilient communities. Among the outcomes, the adoption of the G7 Water Coalition Work Plan marks a major step towards coordinated global action on fresh water. Members committed to work together to mainstream water in international processes, enhance technical collaboration, and mobilize efforts to address pollution and climate-driven water risks. To support this work plan, Canada will host an expert-level workshop on coordinating G7 action and priorities in support of the upcoming 2026 UN Water Conference. We are pleased to see this progress that builds on the coalition's creation under Italy's 2024 presidency, elevating water as a global priority. Through the adoption of the Toronto Action Plan on Circular Economy and Resource Efficiency, members reaffirmed their leadership in advancing low-waste, sustainable economies. S'appuyant sur près d'une décennie.
After around about a decade of work, the new three-year plan multiplies the actions in different sectors where there are significant repercussions: plastics, textiles, and fashion. And circular solutions can very often highlight environmental advantages and economic ones as well. The G7 countries are working together in order to reduce waste, reduce emissions, and strengthen the resilience of supply chains. The results are aligned on Canada's priorities in terms of energy, climate, and the environment in the context of future initiatives and such as strategies for competitiveness and climate.
Preparedness and response, G7 members also took an important step forward to consider collective efforts to strengthen resilience to the growing threat of extreme weather around the world. This is an issue that transcends borders, as we've seen most recently with Hurricane Melissa and challenging wildfire events. Building on the Kananaskis Wildfire Charter, Members discussed collaboration on proactive, science-based prediction, preparedness, and response, including working together on emerging technologies and using more solutions found in nature. Ministers underscored the importance of inclusive, community-led action so that those most affected by extreme weather are partners in building a more resilient future. The Chair's statement outlines recommendations for further discussions and G7 actions on this presidency priority, including at the upcoming UN Climate Change Conference in Belém.
I also co-chaired a high-level roundtable on mobilization of private financing for the climate and the environment, with representatives of international funds, multilateral development banks, the private sector, and civil society. Their discussions led to identification of contributions to public funds in order to generate more private investment in positive solutions for our citizens and the planet. More and more, there's a feeling abroad that we can draw advantages from the successes of the last 10 years, whereas we're preparing means to stimulate our economy in the coming years. We'll all have to work together so that what we do in our respective countries is profitable to our populations, and we can draw on collective wisdom. Discussions have gone to show that galvanizing private funding and strengthening inclusive collaboration with the indigenous peoples and vulnerable communities will remain at the heart of this work. Canada will continue this work with the G7 and other partners in order to continue the recent progress that has been made, such as the third UN Conference on Oceans and the next opportunities offered by the 9th Ministerial Meeting on Climate Action, COP30, and the 7th session of the UN Assembly for the Environment, in order to make progress in energy-related measures in the interests of climate and in the environment. The implementation of the Paris Agreement in the context also of the Montreal Agreement on Biodiversity and the ocean and marine development are part and parcel of the development of sustainable elements. What is more, the G7 will continue these actions with a view to concluding a new global treaty on plastics, and Canada will support the next presidency, which is that of France, in order to make sure that there is continuity, a dynamic continuity as regards our shared priorities, climate, energy and the environment. It was a real pleasure to host colleagues from the G7 and other partners here in Toronto, and I hope that some of you will have the opportunity to encourage our Blue Jays and support them this evening before you travel back home. So I'd like to thank you all very much for these extremely interesting conversations. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you for your leadership throughout the G7 meetings the last few days, and it's always a pleasure to share the stage with you. Hello, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Thank you for joining us here today. As Minister Dabrusin has said, for the past 2 days, G7 energy and environment ministers have come together here in Toronto technological advancement and an accelerating drive towards net zero. Citizens around the world need secure, affordable energy. Investors need conditions to make it possible to deploy capital, and governments must deliver economic growth while reducing emissions. It's fair to say none of this is easy. It's also fair to say it is much harder and less effective if every nation tackles these challenges alone. Throughout this week, Canada's message has been clear. We are committed to building a fair, secure, and sustainable energy future, and we are ready to work with allies to turn ambition into outcomes. Over the last 2 days, we tackled the risks and opportunities shaping our energy future and the critical minerals supply chains. So let me highlight what we've achieved together in a remarkably short period of time. Before I get into the specifics of some incredible projects we're advancing with our G7 partners, I want to preface it by talking about Canada's broader action to safeguard our national security and our sovereignty. Today, we are announcing that the Government of Canada has issued an order in Council under the Defence Production Act, officially designating critical materials as essential Canadian defence and national interests. This enables Canada to launch our own defence stockpiling regimes and to support multilateral stockpiling efforts. These measures will strengthen our capabilities in strategic sectors and contribute to NATO and defence spending commitments. By protecting domestic production under volatile global conditions, we ensure a secure supply of critical minerals to Canadians and to allied defence industries. Furthering these economic and security objectives, I'm also very pleased to announce today the first round of 25 new strategic projects, investments, and measures in support of the G7 Critical Minerals Production Alliance and the Critical Minerals Action Plan. Since its inception in June, the G7 Critical Minerals Production Alliance, or as I like to call it, the Buyers Club, has named a network of envoys tasked with facilitating business-to-business partnerships and mobilizing private and public capital. Our countries have worked intensively over the last 5 months to deliver real deals and actions with substantial financial and political commitments that testify to the real strength of the G7 alliance and positive multilateralism in action. The first round of G7 alliance projects sends the world a very clear message. We are serious about reducing market concentration and dependencies, safeguarding national security and sovereignty, mobilizing capital, and driving investments in sustainable critical mineral projects. Working with our allies, we are unlocking $6.4 billion in critical mineral projects that are essential in the defense and advanced manufacturing sectors. This includes the following project proponents, many of whom are in the room today. Nouveau Monde Graphite and their Matawini mine near Montreal, Quebec, with investments and offtake agreements with the Canadian government, the government of Japan, as well as Panasonic of Japan and Traxys of Luxembourg to support the diversification of global graphite supply chains and security of graphite supply for Canadian use. The Rio Tinto pilot plant at Sorel-Tracy, Quebec, which will enter into commercial scale production to increase the reliable supply of scandium to Canada and our allies, supported by a $25 million investment from the Canada Growth Fund and an offtake agreement with the Government of Canada. For the Strange Lake project in Nunavik, Quebec, where Torngat Metals produces and processes essential rare earth elements, an offtake and technical collaboration agreement is being signed with Carastar, a French rare earths processor. Northern Graphite's Lac des Îles project near Montreal, Quebec, where the company produces North America's sole supply of natural graphite, is entering into an offtake agreement with Ecamia of Italy. Ucore Rare Metals rare earth processing facility is expanding in Kingston, Ontario, supported by federal investments from the Natural Resources Canada and Federal Economic Development Agency of Southern Ontario, as well as agreements with companies in Germany, Australia, and the United States. The Government of Ontario has also committed to expanding the regulatory permitting to accelerate the development of this project. And finally, I'm thrilled to announce that Vianode will be building their first ever synthetic graphite facility, a $2 billion project, and they're choosing to do it right here in Ontario, in St. Thomas, with the support of Canada and Germany, evidence of the fact that Canada is a top-tier investment environment. Supply chain security is something we have long talked about. Well, we're now not just talking, we're acting. Today is proof of concept. Now it's time to sustain and accelerate this progress, including as we get closer to the upcoming PDAC mining conference in March, where we'll be looking to announce more projects. There are a number of promising areas for progress. For example, we've been working closely with Teck to expand capacity at their Trail smelter in British Columbia to produce niche minerals like germanium and gallium and antimony, where mechanisms like stockpiling or floor pricing will be necessary to proceed to a construction decision. These are the types of projects this alliance will need to enable going forward. The Production Alliance proves that G7 nations are turning vulnerabilities into strengths and transforming access to critical minerals into a strategic advantage for our economies, our environment, our industries, and our sovereignty. As we move swiftly to reduce dependence on concentrated supply chains, our collective commitment is clear. Every delay is a concession of economic and national security interests. We will no longer accept that. Instead, we will lead the way with projects that meet the highest possible environmental and labor standards so we can build on our economic competitiveness, ensure responsible mining and manufacturing, and protect our supply chains while we grow our collective resilience. We have also moved forward on the G7 Critical Minerals Action Plan introduced by our respective leaders at Kananaskis this summer by endorsing the roadmap to promote standards-based markets for critical minerals. We're committing to fulfilling targeted innovation gaps in critical mineral research and development with a focus on processing and recycling. It is in this spirit Canada has also announced nearly $20 million project to support over the $20 million of support over the last 2 days for 7 projects involving companies and institutions from Canada, Ukraine, the United States, Germany, and the United Kingdom. I want to repeat the numbers. 26 deals, 9 countries represented, $6.4 billion in Canadian projects unlocked. If you need a proof point that the G7 and multilateralism remains vital and relevant, this is it. If you're wondering whether a middle power like Canada can truly be a leader, I hope you have your answer. Throughout the last 2 days, G7 energy ministers have also advanced an ambitious and wide-ranging agenda as reflected by our 5 outcome statements. We are committed to a call to action on enhancing energy security, doubled down on our support for Ukraine energy security with the G7's first ever statement specific to the topic developed at a G7 work plan specific to that topic, and a G7 work plan on AI and energy, and also the first ever advanced alignment on nuclear energy, including agreeing to expand cooperation on fusion energy. We have also negotiated multiple statements and bilateral agreements to advance our shared goals on energy security, nuclear energy, and support for the Ukraine. This includes Canada-Japan joint statement on energy security, which strengthens our 2 nations' cooperation across sectors including nuclear, batteries, and low-carbon LNG. It includes the launch of the Canada-Italy Energy Dialogue, which will enhance Canadian and Italian cooperation on critical minerals, nuclear energy, and other priority areas. And it includes a joint declaration of intent with Australia focused on collaborating on critical minerals production. I was particularly honored to have Ukrainian Minister Groinchuk with us here in Canada. As co-chair of the G7 plus Ukraine Energy Coordination Group alongside the European Union, Canada remains steadfast in supporting emergency repairs, physical protection, and the scaling up of renewable energy in the Ukraine. To date, Canada has committed nearly $22 billion to assist Ukraine since the beginning of the war. And today, Minister Anand announced Canada is expediting the final portion of its $70 million contribution to the Ukraine Energy Support Fund, fast-tracking $10 million to help Ukraine repair critical energy infrastructure damaged by Russian strikes as recently as last evening. I will continue working with Mr. Groinchuk to mobilize the Canadian private sector in Ukraine's reconstruction, including via the large Canadian business delegation traveling to Poland next month for the Rebuild Ukraine conference. In conclusion, the task before us was to leave this meeting with not only a common action plan, but real action taken. And that's what we've accomplished. Canada succeeded in encouraging the G7 to commit to concrete measures, including building resilient supply chains for critical minerals through our production alliance, mobilizing private capital at scale, including by leveraging public financial institutions and agencies, strengthening support for Ukraine, and aligning innovation in AI, the nuclear industry, and clean energy. I was enormously proud to represent Canadians alongside Minister Dabrusin at this meeting and work to make the very most of this opportunity to position the G7 as the anchor of a rules-based, market-driven, and inclusive international order. There is no doubt that we face great challenges in today's world. But I leave this meeting even more assured that we really do stand together as a proud and unified G7. Now a quick word for Italy and France. To Italy, we would like to express our deep gratitude for the leadership you demonstrated throughout the previous G7 presidency. À la France, alors qui vous...
And France, you are getting ready to pick up the baton of the presidency in 2026. And you can certainly count on Canada to continue to work as a committed and faithful partner.
Just as the G7 was born out of the oil shocks of the 1970s to provide stability and direction, we are now called to do the same task, to lead with unity and act with purpose as we set the tone for the race to 2050 and beyond. It feels like we stand on a precipice. Let us use this moment to recommit the G7 to be a force that strengthens our security, delivers our citizens prosperity, and lays the foundation for a sustainable, reliable energy future. Merci beaucoup, thank you, and most importantly, go Blue Jays. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, bonjour tout le monde. Cela conclut les remarques des ministres.
That's a conclusion of the minister's remarks, and we're going to have questions. I'll explain this to you in French, and then I'll give it to you in English. When I call you out, please introduce yourselves. And we will also have people online, if necessary. If we've got time, we'll take this.
We will now enter the question period. When I call you, please state your name and the name of your outlet. For time, we will keep the Q&A to one question and one follow-up. We also have media online. If time permits, we will also take questions online.
Hi, my name is Anushka. I'm from The Pointer. I wanted to know if there were any talks or any update about the commitment for the G7 countries to phase out fossil fuel subsidies, because the deadline was this year, I think.
So the conversations that we had in the room were very much focused on a few different issues. And if I can begin by even just pulling out and saying, this is my first G7, and it was really wonderful to actually see how candid the conversations were in the room and how really everyone was working together so well in the place. I always try and look for hope when I'm talking about different issues, and I think that this was a real example of how you can see people stepping up and really ready to work together. Our conversations were very much focused on exactly what I had raised at the beginning, working on the circular economy together, which is about also making sure that we're reducing waste. There was conversation about plastics waste kind of related, associated with that. There were conversations about water, which really comes out of the Italian presidency, and what are the next steps that we go forward. And there were a lot of conversations just about, I think if I could focus it in this way, on how all of our countries can find ways to work together on our shared values about moving forward to protect the environment.
So I take it that there was no update on that.
My update is, and I think we should be really happy about the updates we have, like having all of our countries come together and talk about agreement about how we're going to work to build a circular economy. That actually is something that's going to reduce pollution. It's going to reduce emissions as well. And when we're talking about the blue economy and when we're talking about water and how do we protect our fresh water and our oceans, I think those are really exciting topics, and we should be actually seeing how we can build forward. I know that France is going to have an exciting time ahead.
Hi, Catherine de Klerk, Village Media's Parliament today. Minister Hodgson, you said at the Atlantic Council Summit that Canada and its allies are facing a new kind of energy crisis that is in part shaped by climate change. So I was wondering what those, if you can explain what those climate risks are and how they factored into the last 2 days.
So, we had a really robust discussion amongst all of the G7 members and the invited countries. There is a recognition that energy demand is growing at a pace we have not seen in our lifetimes. And there is a massive increase in required energy. What we all are committed to doing is meeting that need for energy in as responsible and sustainable a way as we possibly can. We talked about multiple different fuel sources. We talked about ways to increase the use of non-emitting fuels, to increase the use of renewables, and where we do have carbon-based fuels in our fuel systems, which is a reality, to do it in the most lowest carbon intensity way we can. And I think there was broad agreement that we need to deal with the reality that with the geopolitical context we have, we need to find new sources of energy. With the AI revolution dramatically increasing the need for electricity, we need to find new ways to produce that electricity. What there was shared agreement on is we need to do that in the most responsible and sustainable way we can.
Thank you. And for Minister Dabrusin, how are you going to factor this increased demand and the need for global energy security into your government's updated climate targets, and is that still expected before December?
So when we're talking about, if we're talking about Canada specifically, let's also talk about a story where we've actually managed since Paris, so 10 years ago, when we're marking 10 years ago, to make remarkable progress in bringing down our emissions from a time when our emissions were tracking upwards. to a time where now we're at a point our emissions are at the lowest they've been in almost 3 decades. And so we're actually making sure that we continue with all of the tools that we have to work towards that. We have already rules where we're moving away from coal-fired electricity. Right now you're sitting here in Toronto, which is my home city where we live. When I used to work downtown in one of the towers, I used to look out across Lake Ontario, and we used to have smudge, like a smog layer. About 53 days of the year you'd have smog. And when we got rid of coal-fired electricity in Ontario, we stopped having those smog days. So just as an example of some of the really positive work that's been happening over time, and we're continuing to drive forward. Like that is absolutely our commitment, is to reduce emissions. We need to do it. We know that we need to do it. If I could say, as a moral obligation to our future generations, we have to do it as an existential piece because we are facing increasing wildfires and natural disasters. And it's an economic imperative that we move towards a low carbon economy because that is clearly where the world is going and we can't fall behind in that. So our goal and my commitment, our country's commitment, is to continue to work towards ambition in reducing our emissions.
Hi, Minister Sarah from Carbon Pulse. I'm wondering if, a question for the both of you, if you can speak to how decarbonization and the transition for the low carbon economy factored into your conversations over the last 2 days.
I mean, I would say I'll take on the first piece and then maybe you'll have some more to add. But I would say that when we were talking about issues like a circular economy, for example, as one piece, that is also about making sure that there's the pollution waste. Often we were talking about textile waste, we were talking about plastic waste that washes up, but there's also a certain amount of just wasted energy when you're producing things and then producing things again and throwing them out. So within the context of the circular economy conversations, we were absolutely talking about that. And we were also talking about like our waters and the carbon sink in our oceans and the need to continue to protect the world's biodiversity and our blue environment, if I could say. And so those are important parts of our conversations, but you might have more to add to that.
Yeah, look, what we heard from our allies and what I've been hearing from our allies is they all want to move to net zero. They need to move to net zero in a reality where geopolitics is making energy security a fundamental risk. And if we needed any more poignant reality of that, I will tell you, sitting last night at our dinner with the ministers as we were talking about our respective countries and watching the Minister of Ukraine scroll through her email to find out how many transmission stations were destroyed that evening, how many compressor stations on their natural gas were destroyed by the Russians, how many workers who were trying to repair those energy infrastructure were killed by Russian drones. It was a pretty poignant moment that we cannot take energy security for granted. I will tell you that the Europeans made it even more blunt and said, we live in fear. We lived in fear that if the Russians turned off the gas, we would be sending our entire economies home. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot take our energy security for granted. We need to diversify supplies. What we hear loud and clear from our allies, responsible, environmentally responsible allies like Germany, like Japan, that transition fuels like LNG are important to them, and they want them. And what they say is Canada is the most responsible producer of LNG in the world. We produce the lowest carbon intensity LNG in the world. And what we hear from our allies is we don't want to buy from Vladimir Putin. We don't want to buy from non-democratic states who produce this. We want to buy from you because you're responsible You do it in an environmentally responsible way. You don't use your resources for political coercion. You're our allies. We need your help. That's what we hear from our allies.
A follow-up's okay? Minister, you've mentioned biodiversity as well as water and plastics. I'm wondering if there is any will from the Canadian government to engage in developing a framework for biodiversity credits or markets and nature finance towards those goals.
So those weren't the conversations we were having, obviously, as we were talking about at the G7 today, but we have, if we're talking about multilateralism, an important history in the Montreal Kumings, I always pronounce it incorrectly, but the Kumings-Montreal Biodiversity Agreement, which is something that we stand by as a proud commitment that Canada made to protecting our biodiversity. I know there are going to be a lot more conversations as we go to COP about what our next steps are, and Canada stands proudly in being able to move forward on all of that.
Thank you. Nathaniel Dove, Global News. Minister Hodgson, I'm hoping you can unpack what you said earlier. I don't have the exact phrasing in front of me, but you said the government's passing an order in council declaring Canada's critical minerals essential to Canadian security. Can you just unpack what that means? Does it mean the Canadian government approves companies or deals? And how does that square with the 26 deals Canada has signed?
So at Kananaskis, under our Prime Minister's lead, all 7 members of the G7 agreed to use tools to rectify non-market behavior by certain market participants to constrain the supply of minerals critical minerals we need to operate our economy. We talked about a number of tools to respond to that. One of the tools is countries developing national security stockpiles. Under the Defense Production Act, we have never actually implemented that act before. We now have the ability to create our own national stockpiles of critical minerals, and we have started doing that on selected minerals where we believe we need to build those stockpiles for our national security.
And how does that affect the deals then that Canada is signing? And when you say started, does that mean started when this order in council is officially passed, or that started at G7? And if so, what's the difference between then and today?
So we are today, we are signing stockpiling agreements where we are committing to stockpile certain selected critical minerals for Canada. That creates a demand factor so that some of these projects that we talked about can move forward. Our allies are doing the same thing. This is what we need to do when non-market actors, when we try and develop a mine and a non-market actor floods the market to depress the price so we can't actually get a mine built. We need to create the certainty of demand and the certainty of pricing so that those mines and processing facilities can get built.
Divya from Reuters. Mr. Hodgson, is there a component of price floor for the deals that are announced today? And did it come up at all in your discussion in the last 2 days with your other G7 partners?
The stockpiling agreements have price floors, and that is one of many mechanisms that were agreed in Kananaskis. We talked about OEM offtake agreements. We talked about stockpiling. We talked about the use of debt. We talked about the use of equity investments. We've talked about the use of price floors. We will use the tools we need to make sure Canada and our allies have access to the critical minerals we need for our economies to function.
Thank you. This is for Minister Hodgson as well, and I think this might be... Sorry, Emma Graney with the Globe and Mail. Hello. Riffing off of these questions that all my colleagues are asking, can you give us any actual details about what the minerals are that you're stockpiling and what the price floors? Give us some figures, give us some actual details on any of that yet?
I don't have those details. We are stockpiling 3 different critical minerals. I'll get the specifics for you if I can. I'm not sure what's part of our national security and what I can say publicly, so I'll get back to you on that.
And as a follow-up to that, why are there no U.S. projects in these critical minerals deals that you've reached this week?
Sorry?
U.S. projects.
There are in the deals that we did this week. None of the projects that we announced today were in the United States. The 6 that we announced all happened to be Canadian. All the other G7 countries are investing in our projects. I mean, we all saw that conversation in the White House about cards. We have an incredible set of cards in our critical mineral resources. We have not effectively developed those in the past. These actions, with the support of our allies, are designed to do that and make sure Canada has all the cards it needs in a world where access to critical minerals is becoming a tool of political and geopolitical coercion.
Hi, my name's Ben Simon from the AFP News Agency. Minister Hodgson, I'm wondering, after your conversations today, do you have a sense of timelines for a rebalancing in the supply of rare earths, or when you could start to see a more diversified supply chain? Obviously, there isn't a lot of processing right now that doesn't somehow involve China. And so I'm trying to get a sense in real terms as you announce these deals, what are we looking at here in terms of a market that looks more stable and resilient from your perspective? How long?
So each project is at a different stage. Each project has its own dynamics. Some of these projects are able to be in operation in a matter of months. Others will take 2 or 3 years. There's the development of new mines. There's the development of whole new processing facilities. They're really designed to give us security of supply from mine to magnet, for example, that doesn't exist in the West today. Canada's looking to create that, and it will take time.
Excuse me, Tom Blackwell from the National Post. I have a question for you, Minister Dabrusin. Lee Zeldin of the EPA in his news conference earlier today said that there had been a lot of back and forth with your department about the wildfires in Canada this year and the effect on the U.S. and complaints that they were getting from northern state governors and congresspeople. And he said they wanted Canada to lean into forest management as sort of the solution to wildfires here. This is obviously an administration that doesn't really put a lot of heat into the idea of climate change. What has been your response to those concerns and suggestions, I guess, from the U.S. on our wildfires?
Well, let me take a step back and say that when we're talking about wildfires in Canada, my primary obligation and concern is about Canadians who are being impacted in this moment by wildfires. I mean, not this very moment, but when I'm talking about this summer and the summer that we saw lives lost, communities evacuated, we saw, livelihoods disrupted, businesses disrupted, entire communities impacted. I can't say enough about that. That's maybe why I'm going through such a list, because we absolutely do need to continue to work towards fighting, natural disasters at large, but wildfires specifically. It's something that's a concern for our own country. So, if anyone in the world agrees, I'd say it's not just about, it's about how we go ahead to prevent wildfires, how do we adapt communities in the face of these wildfires. It's also about how we share resources, and if we can say there's a good story to tell internationally about how wildfire firefighting services are coming to each other's aid in that moment. So do I share an absolute commitment that we want to slow down the pace of these wildfires and I want to protect communities? Absolutely.
But how do you deal, though, with a government that, doesn't believe that climate change is a factor in things like wildfires and says, you can deal with forest management? How do you respond to that kind of positioning?
I think the biggest piece that I look at once again is, what are we as a country leaning into when we're fighting? And that's why, in fact, I have, Chair's statement specifically going out and speaking about wildfires and talking about emergencies that our country is facing. So what I say to anyone, Canadians and anyone around the world, is absolutely, we must have to continue to take action to slow down the pace of these natural disasters that we're seeing. We need to continue to fight climate change. We need to do the work that we need to do on adaptation, and that's what we will continue to do.
Thank you, everyone. That is all the time that we have. This concludes the press conference. Merci tout le monde. C'est tout le temps que nous avons sur le concours.
Thank you very much. That's the only time we have. That brings us to the end of the press conference.
All right, counts again. Into it.
Go Jays.